What's going on, guys? Silent Hill 2 apparently got its first update, patch 1.04, and today we're going to compare it to the release version of the game and see if there's been any improvements. Now, they've improved on a lot of stuff gameplay-wise, but also technical. They've added DLSS Frame Generation, and by the looks of it, FSR 3.1.1 and Frame Generation as well, and apparently they've improved stuttering. So we're going to put that to the test, compare it, and then we'll also take a look at DLSS Frame Generation real quick towards the end as well. So let's not waste any time and dive straight into it. I've put together a few different scenarios with a few different settings that we can take a look at and see if what they say is true. I hope so. We're going to start with the forest area. All the footage that I captured was at 3440 by 1440 ultra wide, and we're going to start with ray tracing off, epic graphical preset. So everything's maxed out here. We'll go ahead and zoom in a little and let's put it side by side. On the left, we're going to have the release version of the game, and on the right, patch 1.04. And if you'll remember here, we always used to get some stutters, which you can see it on the release version on the left. But on the right, with patch 1.04, it's actually much smoother. Another thing I noticed that has changed a little is if you look at the CPU utilization on the left, it's quite a bit higher than on the right. Other than that, we seem to be getting slightly less FPS with the new patch, but 1% lows are much better. We're getting 52 FPS 1% lows on the release version versus 62 FPS with patch 1.04, which is an increase of about 20%. That's a really nice gain in 1% lows, which indicates they've definitely made some optimizations with Silent Hill 2's shaky performance. But this is without ray tracing. Let's take a look at the same area with ray tracing and see if anything changes, because that can add more of a load to the CPU as well, which it actually does in this game. Okay, so for this run, we're going to turn ray tracing on and set DLSS to performance with the epic graphical preset. So the reason why I want to do DLSS performance is to put a bit more of a load on the CPU to see if it introduces any more stuttering. And no, it actually, you can see it in the frame time with patch 1.04. It's actually much smoother. And again, we see less CPU utilization with the new patch, while the FPS is relatively the same. So that's pretty good. People with weaker CPUs should see a bit better performance with this too. But the 1% lows is around 62 FPS for the release version of the game and 83 FPS for patch 1.04. So that's a gain of around 30-ish% with the new patch for the 1% lows, which is really nice. But this is the forest area. I wanted to test out outside Neely's bar because that area had quite a bit of stuttering. And let's go ahead and take a look at that other scenario. And then we'll take a look at DLSS because they said they improved the ghosting issues. Here we go then. We're in the town, 3440 by 1440. Okay then, so we're in the town now. We have ray tracing enabled and DLSS set to quality with the epic graphical preset in the town. Alright, so here we go. We're going to be going by Neely's bar, Neely's cafe, whatever it is. Here we used to get a lot of stutters, as you can see on the left. Now on the right, it's not perfect. We're still getting a couple stutters here and there, but it's definitely a step up. Definitely an improvement, I would say, over the old. I mean, at the end of the run, we ended up with 44 FPS for 1% lows on the release version with 52 FPS on the patch 1.04, which is around a 20-ish% or so, which is what we got in the forest. So not perfect, but definitely an improvement. Now, this next part I was extremely interested to test. So it's the sequence when you get the key and you have to run to the Woodside Apartments. Now, this sequence was extremely bad, extremely sloppy, as you can see on the frame time graph. On the release version of the game, it's absolutely horrific. And on patch 1.04, while not perfect, there's still a couple hitches here and there. I mean, it's a night and day difference. We're already at around double, actually a little more than double the 1% lows with patch 1.04 versus the release version, right? So that is a very, very nice improvement here. Again, I mean, you can't really compare 1% lows head to head as I am right now exactly, because the release version of the game was so problematic. It was so prone to stuttering that obviously recording longer sequences, more problematic sequences, is going to show a much bigger difference. But clearly, I mean, it's obvious by now that they've made optimization improvements with the new patch, which is very, very nice to see. Absolutely, that's great. Before we take a look at DLSS improvements and frame generation, I just wanted to run one more test, but with ray tracing disabled this time. And we're not using any DLSS, but I've set the graphical settings to the optimized settings, which is essentially shadow quality set to low and shader quality to medium. This is actually a really good way to get, I don't know, 20 to 30% more performance easy. And it's a big gain for AMD GPUs, by the way. So this is the Neely's bar area again. And we're actually very close to, if not CPU bound a lot of the time here. And as you can see, we're getting a lot of stutters on the release version of the game. Now with patch 1.404, it's not perfect. We are getting some stuttering and hitches, but it is better. It's definitely better. If you look at the frame time and the 1% lows, as a matter of fact, what we end up with is 43 FPS for 1% lows on the release version of the game and 63 FPS for 1% lows on the patch 1.04 version of the game, which is what like 50% more on the 1% lows. That's pretty good. Let's take a look at DLSS now. Alright, so we're right outside Neely's bar again, and we've set ray tracing to on and DLSS quality with the epic graphical preset. And this game had ghosting issues, so this is the release version of the game. As you can see, as the leaves move around, there's quite a bit of ghosting. Now moving the camera, it clears right up, but if you sit still for a little bit, there's a bit of ghosting. Now this could have been fixed already if you upgraded to the latest DLSS version and changed the preset with the DLSS tool to D, I believe. But the developers say in the patch notes that they've fixed this ghosting issue with DLSS. So let's take a look at this same area, same settings on patch 1.04, no modding of any kind. And here we go, guys. This is patch 1.04, and it looks like they've fixed it. This is DLSS quality, and there's no ghosting of any kind. Now, there is very little ghosting, but that's not because of DLSS. As a matter of fact, if we were to take a look at the game running at native resolution, even at native resolution, if you look at the leaves, there is like a smidge of a ghosting trail, and I believe that's because of the denoising. The game uses software lumen or hardware lumen if you turn on ray tracing, and the denoising can sometimes result in a bit of ghosting, and you actually see this on some other Unreal Engine 5 games as well. But the DLSS definitely does improve even over the native as far as the ghosting. Alright then, so lastly, before we wrap up the video, I wanted to test out DLSS Frame Generation. So now we're going to 4K resolution with hardware ray tracing enabled, DLSS quality, and the epic graphical preset. Now the reason why we're doing this is that so we get an overall idea of the type of frame rate we get before we turn on frame generation. Now it's worth keeping in mind that you have to use DLSS Super Resolution in order for DLSS frame generation to become available. So yeah, DLSS frame generation does not require this. The way it's set up is you should be able to use frame generation without having to use upscaling, but in this game, that's how it's set up. And personally, I don't really have a problem with it because I think DLSS actually improves over the image quality here, even over native, and even with some ghosting now that they've updated the DLSS with the patch 1.04. So yeah, I don't have a problem with that really. And yeah, we seem to be averaging around 85, 86 FPS, around that. So let's go ahead and throw frame generation on and see how many more frames we can get with that. So we're now running the same exact area again. We've now enabled DLSS frame generation. We're still playing at 4K hardware ray tracing, DLSS quality, and the epic graphical preset. And yeah, we get a pretty good bump to our frame rate, whereas previously we averaged around 84 FPS. Throwing DLSS frame generation on top of that brings us all the way up to 123 FPS average. So that's not really a doubling of the FPS like Nvidia promised, really, but we are getting around 50% more frames on the averages. So yeah, that's pretty good. I mean, I'm playing on a 4K OLED C1 TV, so yeah, this is pretty good. Feels pretty smooth. Realistically, I'd be locking the frame rate anyway, but yeah, that's a pretty nice bump. DLSS frame generation seems to work pretty good, and I don't really see any garbling or anything like that that's associated with frame generation. It actually looks pretty decent. But before we wrap it up, I just wanted to recommend some settings you can tweak to get a lot more frames. So right now we're getting 73 FPS. This is at 4K with DLSS set to quality, ray tracing, and the epic graphical preset. Now if we change the epic graphical preset to custom, set shadow quality to low and shader quality to medium. Not going to lose much of an image quality, but you'll go from 73 FPS all the way to 90 FPS just by making those tweaks. So this is for those people that want to get some extra frames. I think this is a good way to do it without a huge compromise, right? Now you also have access to DLSS frame generation on top of this. Let's go ahead and throw DLSS frame generation on as well. And that takes us all the way to 127 FPS, right? So we started with 73, optimized settings to 90, DLSS frame generation to 130 almost. So there you go. I don't think running the epic graphical preset is necessarily worth it, but hey, you do you. I like to recommend these settings because it's a good way to get some extra performance if you want it. Well, I guess it's that time where we have to wrap up the video. It's gone long enough. I do appreciate you guys watching and liking the video if you liked it. Consider subscribing if you want to see similar content. But I guess to share my thoughts is that this is a good patch. It was much needed, especially after not getting a day one patch or anything. Now getting DLSS and FSR frame generation. I'll have to check FSR frame generation in a separate video, by the way. But it's kind of concerning with Unreal Engine 5 and so many big studios abandoning their own proprietary engines for Unreal Engine 5. We've seen quite a few games launch with stuttering issues. Now, I don't care if Epic Games and Microsoft and Nvidia, AMD have to go to the United Nations and get a resolution to get this under control. I think there needs to be some effort put into this because it's not just PCs that's having some stuttering issues. It happens on console too. Silent Hill on PlayStation 5 does not run great, but that's what it is, guys. Thanks for watching. Give a like and I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.